Welcome to GrayPrimer, a channel that's mostly about miniatures. My name is Nick, I'm your host, and in this episode I'm doing something I've never done before. A sequel. Yes indeed, we return to the Emperor's Palace on Terra, the towering walls that protect it. And in my first Siege of Terra diorama, I featured a War Master Iconoclast Titan being besieged by Imperial Knights. But I found it took a lot of planning and a lot of work to try and get across that sense of gargantuan scale when you don't have any really small miniatures to compare it against. But with the launch of the Legions Imperialis big box, we got the tiny little infantry miniatures, and now we can get that comparable scale into dioramas like these. But before we get started, I just want to mention that AK Interactive sent me out some freebies, so I figured I'd try those out during this video, so more on that to come. And while this video isn't actually sponsored by anyone, it's certainly inspired by someone. One of my favorite authors working today, Dan Abnett, has written some of the most memorable content within the HORUS Heresy series of novels. And he's the person they entrusted to wrap it all up right at the end of the Siege of Terra, with The End and the Death volumes 1 through 3. And this diorama is inspired by a line that he wrote within volume 1. They have crucified titans along the ultimate wall. Like, wow, that just blows my mind and sparks my imagination at the same time. Like, how do you even do that? And how do you represent that in something like a diorama? Let's find out. Finally, we get ourselves a Thunderhawk in plastic. Hopefully they bring out a bigger scale one of this in the coming months or sometime next year. I'm a bit disappointed by the black and white instruction manual, but the kit itself is lovely. And the Warlord Battle Titan is just so cool as well. Tons of detail throughout this kit, lots of opportunities for articulation, weird base, play instructions, black and white manual, 3 frames of plastic, all of which is exquisitely detailed. A beautiful kit to build, and yeah, really happy. And then we have the Legions Imperialis launch box. Just so many miniatures come in this thing, it's ridiculous. Over 200 miniatures. Admittedly, a lot of them are smaller than the fingernail on your pinky finger, but still, look at all these tanks. Look at the detail in the tanks as well. You get a Solar Auxilia Force, I think that's what they're called. Space Marines Force, you get Titans, you get tanks coming out of your ears, walkers, banner bearers, and these are just so cute. Look at those Space Marines. You get a whole bunch of little bases, dice, and then a comprehensive transfer sheet too. The manual is thankfully in color this time, and you also get these little counters and some cheat sheet, reference sheet things for playing the game. And then we have the sepia toned rulebook, which is beautifully made. Look at the images of these titans in it and knights, and lots of inspirational images of paint jobs, and lots of cool units that you might not be familiar with. Ones that you can go out and spend your hard-earned on to expand your armies. And the rest of the book is what you'd expect from something like this. Rules, lots of narrative stuff, lots of great images, and yeah, pretty cool. And just look at this cute little predator, but look at the amount of detail in it too. Here's a Sikaran, same amount of detail, and they're just so tiny, and the world's cutest Warhound. Got a Contemptor dreadnought there, just probably fit 30 of these in the palm of my hand, and you probably fit about 100 of these. There it is, the most beautiful spaceship in Warhammer, and I'm so glad I own one now. And here's the Warlord Titan, and most of this isn't stuck because it just means I can articulate it later. You can see the movement in the fingers there, which is so cool. This poor predator is going to see a lot of damage as well. It'll have a broken tread, it'll have a pop turret, and yeah, I try to match the pin vise bits to the diameter of the weapons that we're seeing on the battlefield, just to give that little touch of realism. I am not kind to miniatures when I'm working on them at this stage of a diorama. Even the clippers get used here. All of that time waiting for the likes of a Warlord Titan or a Thunderhawk, and this is how I treat them when they come into my home. Speaking of mistreatment though, the Warlord is going to take the cake. It's going to be short 1 arm and 1 leg. It'll have been through a lot by the time it got hooked up on the walls of Terra. And just a trigger warning that when the Dremel gets shoved into the body of this thing, it gets pretty grim in there. When I'm priming miniatures, I tend to just use double-sided tape, little bits of scrap wood, spray them, and then peel them off. It just works super easy. I use Citadel Color layer paint, the Sons of Horus, mixed with some of that golden high flow medium. Helps create thinner layers because too much paint on these and they just clog up the detail. AK's gunmetal is a phenomenal paint for doing just all of those little metal details, rivets, treads, guns and things. Goes on beautifully. And AK's rubber black as well is one of my favorite paints. Almost like a green tone to it, super flat, super matte. There was a small accident with some enamel paint, and while I had a moment of panic, didn't stop me grabbing the camera before I tried to clean it up. I like to print off some example images of completed paint jobs just to give me a little help, and then I make these detailed palettes. I also have sort of an order of play for painting them as well. Don't always follow them, but you know, I write them out. I do love AK's gunmetal. It really reminds me of Citadel's old chainmail paint. Smells kind of the same too. AK's intense black is one of the best blacks I've ever used. It goes on so smooth, dries ultra matte, and it's fantastic. And speaking of AK, they very kindly sent me out these sets of dual exo, and you get 2 different tones of the same color, and you can mix them and gives you different transitions. Big bottles as well, 60 mil. They are super smooth out of the bottle and they just blend it together really easily. AK also sent me some of their inks, the primary color range, and I just love these bottles, glass bottles, these lovely glass pipettes to dispense them, and it gave a really easy shade against that red. And then the Pluto Stone and Solar Yellow gave me everything I needed for doing these little missile tips. And yeah, I really recommend the dual exo sets from AK and also their inks. Good stuff. AK's brass is another one of my favorite metallics and goes on slightly thinner than gunmetal, but works a treat. And I got the AK magenta ink there out again for the eyes. Worked really well. And here it is before I start to damage it, just in its base colors. I use Agrax Earthshade to shade my silvery bits. I just think the earth tones of Agrax work better. I use some of this Tamiya, I think that was Tamiya branded masking tape to create this stripe effect, and then I just use black paint to fill in the gaps here. My first time doing this actually, and I wanted it to be a bit rough and ready, and I think it's okay. Maybe I would have wanted it to be a tiny bit tidier than this, but it's alright, and I do tidy it up after this too. AK Deep Shade Pure Grime acts very similarly to Agrax Earthshade, and at this stage I was running out of Agrax, so I dipped into this, and I kinda like the way this worked a little better than Agrax. Anyway, Warlord Titan time. Printed off an inspirational page, gave myself some hints and tips here, and then I got to gunmetaling a huge amount of the undercarriage of this thing. If I do another one of these in the future, I'm going to leave the armor plates off and just lead belcher the whole thing with a spray can. AK's buff is a cool color, and you can see what it looks like straight out of the pot here. Super smooth. Citadel's contrast in Blood Angel's red is a cool paint to use. I love the way it pools at the bottom here too. And now one of my favorite parts of doing one of these is getting it grubby and track wash. This is an enamel paint, so this will thin with mineral spirits, white spirit, or AK's own odorless thinner. I just shove it on there. It goes into all those little nooks and crannies, all the damage I'd previously done. It just settles in there. Even long after it's dried, you can knock it back with a little bit of odorless thinner or mineral spirits and create highlight effects, push the pigment down into the scratches and recesses. Vallejo Metal Color Steel is one of my favorites for giving that freshly scratched look to metalwork. Steel Harpy Gaming do these ultra cool templates that are reusable. You just shove them onto the part of the miniature you want to do like an effect on, and then just slap some paint onto it. I think I should have pushed it a little harder on here because it has a bit of overrun, but again, I don't mind, just like the thing on the leg of the Warhound. And then you can store it just on the packaging. Yeah, so that's Steel Harpy Gaming. Very cool. And here is some of the smallest decal work I've ever done. I used to dread doing decals, but I'm okay with them now. Just a bit of practice and using the right materials has got me much better at it. You gotta love Dirty Down's rust paint. This stuff, just slap it on, shove it into all the corners that you want, be as heavy-handed as you like with it, because all you've got to do is put water on your brush and you can knock it right back. You can push it around. You could remove it completely with enough water. It just dries super matte and crunchy. Love it. So here it is. Yeah, this is what it's going to go into. Finally, we get into the setting for all of these cool miniatures you've seen painted. Just a small interruption here as I burn the end of my finger off trying to clear this stuck nozzle of plastic cement. Yeah, don't do this at home. But it's effective, but just don't. This is all pretty much greebly stuff. Bits and pieces I find knocking around from other sets, sometimes from other brands. Let's take a moment to appreciate Yoo-Hoo's expanded polystyrene glue. You can use this on all different types of foams. It will not melt it, it will not erode it. It's just great. It's nowhere near as quick as like plastic cement or super glue. Just be patient with it. It will stick all your foams together. It'll stick wood to foam, plastic to foam. Highly recommended if it is available in your neighborhood. I use a lot of different materials here. There's bits of barbecue skewers, old cutoffs from MDF kits, random pieces I find in my bits box. Whatever works, whatever gives an effective overall look at the end. And even this foam that all of this stuff is set into was packing foam from a Secret Labs chair or a desk or something. Don't throw anything out if you at all think you could use it later on. And for the back of the Warlord, I wanted it to look like it's been shoved into a section of wall that's been repeatedly bombed. It's all cratered. It's just created this sort of indentation at the top of the wall that another much larger Titan, maybe an Imperator class Titan, has grabbed this Warlord, punched it so hard into this wall that it's just got hooked up on all of the debris, and it's left itself stuck, appearing like it's been crucified to this wall. And with the arm out to the side, I thought, yeah, that's a convincing enough crucifixion for me. He just kind of got hooked up on the wall, dealt so many severe blows that it suffered Titan death. And as I play around here, I realized that certain components that I thought would have been cool in the diorama background just weren't going to work. Especially with something as chonky as a Warlord Titan. I used Das stone clay to fill in all of the gaps here that I've created. And I also push the Warlord in there. It makes an impression which I'll be able to check in on later on. Once the Warlord is painted, it shows me how to seat it properly. Do a lot of damage to the doorway here. I want to show that the walls of the palace have been breached, and it gives the opportunity for tanks to roll up this little hill that I make out of clay, through the gap, and onto the Emperor's throne room or something. Das clay is great to work with, just dries in air, you don't have to bake it or anything. I wanted to leave some impressions of tank tracks going up there. I use Woodland Scenic glue to seal all of that in, but also to give me something to stick this groovy, sparkly blackstone. I think this is called ballast. I think that's what it is. One of the big elements of this diorama was that it was supposed to be a sequel to this thing, which is a War Master Iconoclast Titan, a bigger Titan even than the Warlord, being assaulted by these Imperial Knights at the walls of the Imperial Palace. Because it was recessed into this plinth, I knew that I had to remove it from the plinth. I needed it to sit snugly against the new diorama, which meant very nervously removing this plinth. It took a long time to make this diorama, and I didn't want to break it, but thankfully the Munchkin game underneath, which is a nice little Easter egg, especially this part of it, which I'd used to keep its structural integrity intact. That was kind of cool to find. Case of just removing all of that, got it down to the bare cork, similar to this sheet, and that meant I was able to line them up much better together. I remounted it on cork and some more cork and XPS foam there, and then I just double checked that the two would match. I used the Ammo one-shot black primer here as a cover-all. It's incredibly effective, dries fast, and sticks to anything. And then Tinny Tin is good for picking out all of these little details around it and contrasts well with the black. I like this AK concrete effect terrain. It works well as a dry brush effect. Then the decals were still fiddly, but not as bad as the ones on the pauldrons of the Space Marines, which I also did. And things get very messy as I try to match up the ramp going up to the breach in the door with the base here. But again, Das Clay, even blended in with some of this PVA glue, just all works really well. And we got more AK terrain stuff here. This is their asphalt. And it's funny, this one had completely dried out and I thought it was for the bin. I just chucked some water in there, mixed it up with the tail of a brush, and it was back up and running again. Great stuff. And then things get very muddy here as I just try to add different colors and different textures to this. It's hard to photograph all of that because it's just so much tweaking as you go. I didn't quite match the color of the two sections, but I think that's okay. I imagine there'd be a lot of varying colors along the walls of Terra. Then finally, to stick some miniatures onto this thing, I used some florist's wire cut into little sections here, cut off the Marines, file down their bases so they're nice and smooth, and then pin vise very small holes into them, which will then take the florist's wire just with a little bit of super glue. Such a fiddly job, but I knew that by doing this, they would seat really well into the diorama base. I nervously detached the Warhound from its base, and even more nervously detached the Warlord from its big Valkyrie flight stand. And then a whole bunch of super glue, and I'm able to reseat it just because I made those guide marks earlier on. More super glue to make sure that he's not going anywhere. Don't exactly want him to fall forward and smash into that beautiful Thunderhawk. All of the elements just going into place. And yeah, ultra small Marines. You can really see just how micro they are when you're doing this kind of work with them. But actually, a lot of fun to paint. Nice challenge. And then the Warhound just tries to take a bite out of the top of this Predator to wrap things up. So here it is, the sequel to the Siege of Terra, Titan at the Palace Walls. This is Death of a Titan. As Dan Abnett says in The End of the Death, Volume 1, they've crucified Titans along the ultimate wall. Sons of Horus infantry flood from the open maw of a Thunderhawk and race to join a column of tanks as they climb up the rubble pile into the breached skin of the Imperial Palace on Terra. This has been my most ambitious diorama to date. It's taken the longest, but it has been a huge amount of fun throughout. I'll definitely return to this scale again in the future, but for now I just want to thank you for being here, spending some time with me. Please subscribe for more content like this, like, share, do all the things, and I will catch you on the next one. For now, thanks so much, take care, and bye-bye.